Good day, two-wheeled friends. Zach Kortz here, joined as always by Spurgeon Dunbar. This is Season 6, Episode 7 of Highside, Lowside. Coming at you this time around, and not the news segment about the closing of Pismo Beach to motorcycle traffic here in California. A discussion about controversies in the world of motorcycling, helmet laws, lane splitting, that kind of thing. There's no guest on this episode, so it'll be just the Spurge and myself playing the Rev Trivia game. And of course, we will give away a t-shirt to a lovely reviewer of Highside, Lowside, and answer some of the comments you have left on our YouTube channel and sent us via email. Before we get to all that, a quick word from Spurge and Motul.
Here on Highside, Lowside, Zach and I sometimes fall under criticism of not loving all motorcycles equally, and it's simply not true. We love the fact that there's a motorcycle out there for every rider amongst our audience, and if there's any brand that feels the same way, it is Motul. They have got all of your V-twin oil lubrication needs covered amongst all the other different kinds of oil out there. They've got primary case oil, they've got gear oil, they've got engine oil. For all of you V-twin enthusiasts, you want to make sure you check out RevZilla.com/Motul. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL. And while you're over there on RevZilla.com, make sure you check out the RPM page. For only $5 a month, you get the benefits of free 2-day shipping, free returns, and as we're going to talk about in the episode today, you get Common Tread Journal. This is our print magazine that you will get as part of the RPM benefits and so much more. So to check out all the benefits for RPM, go to RevZilla.com/RPM.
Welcome everybody to Highside, Lowside. Very excited to be back talking about motorcycle stuff with you all. First on the docket, as is tradition in Season 6, Spurgeon, not the news.
I think you opened up a can of worms by calling me the Spurge, though. So, like, I'm gonna need you to refer to me as the Spurge from here on out.
Now on. Yeah, no problem.
It's only what I'll respond to.
our not the news segment this time around is about the impending closure of the Pismo Beach recreation area, Oceano Dunes, I believe it's called. Our colleague Jen Dunstan did a very comprehensive research video that is on the RevZilla YouTube channel as we podcast right now, and it's worth watching. It's very interesting. The reason that this is the piece of motorcycle news that we wanted to focus on this time around is not because we want everyone to focus on California and this particular beach closure, is it, Spurge? It's more that we want to provoke thought and action from our listeners about other riding areas that might be closing or facing the same potential closure around the country.
It's interesting because I think, Jen did a great job addressing the plight of the snowy plover, which is a tiny little ocean bird, and it's adorable. That is being affected potentially, hypothetically, in some of the accusations, if you will, as to why they want to close this riding area down. She goes into detail. She does thorough research. But at face value, if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't live in California, I don't ride in California, this doesn't really affect me, she does touch on at the very end of the video, this is not just unique to California. In the past 2 years, we've had issues where organizations are trying to shut down off-road riding in Moab. Right now, currently in New Jersey, we're dealing with legislation that's trying to be pushed through to shut down off-road riding in the Pine Barrens. And for anyone that's listened to this podcast,
Pine Barrens, Spurgeon.
For anyone that's listened to this podcast or read my articles, the Pine Barrens are extremely important to me as a rider. They're extremely important to the Northeast because this is one of the few areas that we have to ride off-road. When you're looking west of the Mississippi, 80% of Bureau of Land Management land, BLM land, which is typically a little bit more open to things like motorcycling, 80% of the land is west of the Mississippi. So if you're a rider that rides on the East Coast, you understand that we have limitations as to where we can go and ride our motorcycles legally off-road. And so whether you're interested in learning more about Pismo Beach and how this potentially could affect off-road riding in California, but more importantly, if you're interested in seeing how we all need to get involved, I think it's a great piece as a kickoff, and then kind of doing your research and being more involved, because we need everybody. Like, everybody has to has to help out. They've got to sign waivers. Sure. They've got to get involved with surveys. They've got to do their part, because otherwise we're going to lose some of these lands forever.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things I really like about Jen's piece, her video, is that she, I think in some ways, asks motorcyclists to, I mean, everyone, but motorcyclists specifically, because that's sort of what we care about and talk about at RevZilla, to care about this kind of thing, to care about off-road riding areas, and also to care about snowy plovers and other potential seabirds or pieces of wildlife. I think it's, I think there can be synergy, symbiosis, sort of like a relationship between motorsport enthusiasts and nature that is balanced and fair. Well, I think that's something to shoot for.
Well, that's the goal here, right? Like, and I don't want. I think oftentimes motorcyclists get painted in a bad light. So one of the facts that was thrown out to me recently, and for anyone listening to this, if you want to learn more, it'll be the survey will be over by the time this airs, by a couple of days. But I currently have in my Instagram bio page, I have the link for the New Jersey survey, and I'll leave it up for a few extra days so you can at least click on it if you're interested. My Instagram handle is just Spurge Dunbar, but I'll leave the link in there if you want to learn a little bit more about this. But one of the things that I found interesting was in a recent meeting in one of the New Jersey race organizations, they had facts that show that dirt bikes are actually less disruptive to the land and the environment around them than riding horseback. And I think oftentimes, when you're looking at things like motorcycling, because it's noisy, it burns gasoline, there's oftentimes this natural implication that that must be worse for the environment. But in a lot of cases, because of the way that we do ride and the way that we do respect the land, not all of us, but those of us that are trying to do it responsibly, we're actually less disruptive than other forms of enthusiasts that are using different methods of enjoyment for the park's area,
that's
in the land.
That would have actually been a perfect segue into Moto Controversies. Motorcycles are less disruptive than horses. Fight.
Yeah,
anyway,
I did not do enough research on that. I just remember I heard that anecdote coming out of the last organizational meeting, and I was like, that's super interesting, because if you ask me off the top of my head,
from username Two Stroke Tom, it's those horses that are pooping everywhere. And
yeah, but it's interesting. If I were to ask you, just without any other further knowledge, if you thought, you and I going out for a ride on dirt bikes, or you and I going out for a ride on horses, which would do more damage, chances are, you probably would have said, "Oh, us on dirt bikes."
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how you define damage, also. But this is not the video that we're trying to make today. Mostly, we just want you to go and watch Jen's video about the Oceano Dunes and the Pismo Beach motorsport area.
And when you're done watching her video, there's also a brand new CTXP. So there's so much content. As soon as you're done watching Jen's Pismo Beach video, which is going to take about 8.5 minutes of your time, and you're going to love every second of it, you then can go and check out Zach and his colleague Ari Henning. And Zach, where are you taking us on this adventure?
The reason that we're pitching CTXP so hard is that they only come out every so often, right? There's only 3 or 4 a year, and this podcast, when it goes live, the very next day, there's a CTXP going up. And it is about going to my hometown in Vermont, digging up an old racing sidecar from my dad's barn, and then taking a road trip and racing it, as Ari and I have often dreamed of doing over the past 20 some odd years of friendship. So it's a CTXP long in the making, and it should be fun. I don't know.
You and Ari spend most of your time dreaming about going to Canada, America's hat. That's where your dreams are.
I never even mentioned Canada, Spurge, but that's
a
segue
little teaser. Just throwing it in there.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really fun. Anyway, check out CTXP. It's on the RevZilla YouTube channel. We tried really hard on it, and our boss spent a bunch of money. So please like and subscribe. Let's start talking about Moto Controversies, shall we? We've killed enough time, I think, wandering around the topic. So, Spurgeon Dunbar, what do we mean by controversy in the motorcycle world here? Let's give it a little definition and parameter for today's discussion.
So what we're specifically talking about are existing laws or requests for laws regarding motorcycles in general. These are topics that are something that when we mention them, most likely if you're a motorcyclist, you're going to feel some sort of way about it, whether you're for it or against it. Some of this stuff is maybe public nuisance or public disruption, maybe not necessarily something that falls under an exact legal code. But what we're not talking about is, shady big business practices or racers that cheated on a race and how that's, a controversy in that. We're talking about more larger general themes, I would say.
Yes. The most, the tallest lightning rod of them, I think, would be helmet laws. And that's our first topic to dive into, to talk about today, is the topic of sort of, there are places in the United States where you don't need a helmet. There are places in the United States where you do need a helmet. And it's an often debated thing. So the way that, yes, Birch, I can tell you have something to say.
No, I was just going to set up the guidelines, but it sounds like you're going to go through and do that. Yeah.
So the way this will work is we will present a topic and then we will try to outline very broadly the pros, the arguments for such a law or such a set of rules, and then against, without inserting our opinion, and then we'll have a discussion about it. Which
we'll shove our opinions down your throat. Yeah, yeah.
Right. We'll do a little bit of that. But the point of this, I do want to say before we get into it, is to provoke thought among you, the listening and viewing audience. We want you to, think about this stuff in different ways. We're hoping to present different ideas than you've maybe heard before, and in the hopes that you will perhaps see a different point, someone else's point of view, or at least think about the whole topic differently as a whole moving forward.
And I think the important note here is, like, as we've gone through each one of these, Zach and I had a conversation ahead of time where it's like, I do think, with the exception of maybe one or two, I think that Zach and I could probably pivot and argue for either side, because we try to keep an open mind on a lot of this stuff as we work through it. So we hopefully you can learn something and maybe appreciate someone else's point of view as we get through it. And Zach, why don't you kick things off today with helmet laws?
So, helmet laws. The people who are for helmet laws will tell you that helmets are objectively safer. For one, a head hitting the ground in a helmet is less likely to be damaged than a head hitting the ground without a helmet, and that in and of itself is good for motorcycling as a whole, because it promotes a safer pastime, and putting a set of guidelines around people having to wear helmets is, in the long run, good for motorcycling, because it creates more lifelong riders and grows the society and community of motorcycling. I think those are the big hot topics for pros. Did I miss anything?
I think those are the pros. I think it really, I mean, if you had to pick the overarching theme for pros, it's safety, right?
Yep. So, cons.
Yep. So I think as we're thinking about helmet laws, the people that are against helmet laws are people that want to argue for the fact that this is America and I have the freedom to choose whether or not I wear a helmet, and I have the freedom to do what I decide to do. The other argument that I sometimes hear is that helmets can impede my peripheral vision, and I want to have a nice wide field of vision, and I don't want to have that inhibited in any way. And I think the other argument that I've heard sometimes is, tied back into that safety argument. And it's, if I'm going to get in a motorcycle crash and if I crash in a helmet, I'll be a paraplegic for the rest of my life. I'd rather just die. And I know that sounds grim and it sounds gruesome. I think it's important to note that motorcycling is dangerous. And when we're talking about helmet laws, it ties directly into that aspect of danger. Did I miss anything?
Sure.
Helmet hair, dandruff, things like that.
Yeah, right. Causes dandruff, causes hair loss, causes ear pain. Stuffy in the heat, causes more dehydration when it's hot out. I think those are kind of like a little bit silly, but those are some things that people have said, and we looked up, and I think it's important to weigh them. So I'm curious. It's interesting to me because when I made my list of pros and cons, I actually had a longer list of individual sort of like items against helmet laws than I had for helmet laws, even though I personally am pro. Did you find that at all?
I tried to keep the themes a little bit general, so for example, like for pros for safety, right? If you want to break that down and nitpick, you can go down into like insurance, and like then it's like, all right, well, if you're safer, then maybe there's going to be, keeping somebody going after they've been in an accident with a helmet is going to cost less for insurance than for not. And like you could break all of that down, but then like the con of that is like, well, if you just die right away, there's no medical costs, so like I tried to keep it more general in its themes, and I didn't try to go into some of that nitty-gritty.
Well, what about the topic of like harder to hear the environment around you? That's something that I've heard people say about
if you're not wearing a helmet, it's so bloody loud that your ears are bleeding by the time you're done riding. Like, I don't know how people can cruise down the highway and not have ear protection in a full face helmet, let alone, my ears are ringing after, if I go for an all day ride, if I'm out touring 400 miles a day and I'm not wearing ear protection, my ears are ringing by the end of the day. I don't know how you do that without a helmet on. Like, that just sounds like you wouldn't be able to hear anything anyway.
Would you say that you can hear things better with a helmet on with earplugs in at speed than you can without? Like a car horn or tire screeching or something like that.
I've never had any problem, even with earplugs in, hearing the things around me. Now, I might not be able to hear the nuance of like the valves clickety-clacking or things like that, but I mean, if somebody's honking a horn, you can absolutely hear that. And I think it's interesting because the same people that are arguing, in some cases, for no helmet laws because they want to be able to hear everything, have the loud pipes save lives sticker on the back of their jacket, and their exhaust is so loud they can't hear anything over that anyway. So I don't think that that argument necessarily holds as much water for what it's worth.
Loud pipes save lives for what it's worth is not a topic of discussion today, but it is something that we talked about in our Moto Myths episode. Is it not?
That is
right?
correct.
I actually don't remember what we talked about. Nope. Chase mentioned that.
And I think that gets back into like what we're talking about today are not necessarily myths. This is a bit more controversy. And I think there's some overlap. I think, because even as we were going through planning for this episode, some of the myths that were left over ended up tying into some of these controversies.
Sure.
So you said that you are for helmet laws. Why? What is it about helmet laws that, like, the government saying that you have to wear a helmet is something that you are in favor of? Why is that?
Right. Well, I think largely it's because I prefer to wear a helmet because I like it. But I think when I think about why, if I didn't ride a motorcycle, why would I think a helmet law is a good idea? I guess it's because I think it does more to create an environment of longevity in a pastime. It's more likely to create lifelong riders. It's more likely to make people, to attract people to riding motorcycles that are more safety conscious and less likely to create, or there are likely to be fewer injuries in general because it's safer. So I appreciate when people say that they don't want, Big Brother telling them what to do, that they don't want, everyone can have their own feelings on how involved, the government should be in our lives. But when it comes to helmets, I can appreciate people being like, "No, I just want to decide." But I don't. I think that on the whole, it's better if everyone wore a helmet.
So I would agree with you that I think that it's better on a whole if everyone wears a helmet. However, I disagree in the fact that, like, I'm kind of not for helmet laws. And here's why. Like, I do fall on the side of the fence of, like, I don't want the government telling me that I have to wear a seatbelt in the car. Like, do I wear a seatbelt? Yes. Do I think the government should tell me that I have to wear a seatbelt? No,
right.
I don't. And listen, I think a lot of times, and I see this a lot in people that reach out to me on Instagram and people that I talk to, at events. I think there's this natural assumption that because we work at RevZilla, which is a large, gear retailer, that we automatically fall into like the all the gear all the time category. And I've had people come up to me and be like, "Can you believe people that aren't wearing head to toe outfits, in the summer months?" and I'm like, I can. And I say that because I'm guilty of it. Like, I can't sit here on this podcast and say that I've never ridden from my garage down the street to the gas station to fill up my motorcycle without putting my helmet on. Because I live in Pennsylvania, and in the state of Pennsylvania, there is not a helmet law. So have I done it?
For adults, right?
Is it so here's the deal. In Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly, if you are over the age of 20, you don't have to wear a helmet. Right. Or if you are under the age of 20 and you have taken the MSF program, you don't have to wear a helmet. And the reason that I remember that specifically, and it might have changed since I got my license, was because they talked about it in the MSF program. In the MSF program, they said, if you have to wait until you're over 20 years old until you take your helmet off. But if you take the MSF program, you don't have to. And they almost did it as this weird selling point, which I didn't appreciate at the time.
Right.
But I don't know if that's the same anymore. I do know that it's over the age of 20 in the state of Pennsylvania is the general rule.
Okay. So on that topic, suppose you see suppose you had a friend with a kid who's 6 years old or 8 years old or something like that, and they're like, I'm going to take a spin on my motorbike, and they go on a ride and they don't wear a helmet, and they also don't put their kid in a helmet. And I know that in Pennsylvania that is not technically legal.
They have to have their kid. They have to have their kid in a helmet if they're under the age of 20.
But there are places where you can, I think New Hampshire for one, right? And there are a couple other. Chase did this research. Illinois, Iowa, New Hampshire. I think I remember New Hampshire because I grew up in Vermont, and it was always very clear when you go to New Hampshire that there's no helmet law because people wouldn't wear helmets. So regardless, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about setting the example of not wearing a helmet for someone who's impressionable or too young to necessarily make the decision for themselves?
Listen, in general, and this is where I don't want people. I don't want a bunch of angry messages on Instagram, and I don't want a bunch of angry emails.
Too late,
being
buddy.
Like, Spurgeon doesn't
this
wear
is
a
the
helmet.
controversy episode. We're getting lots of angry messages.
But I agree with you that I think helmets are the right choice, right? I think helmets. You should wear a helmet. If you have kids, they should be in a helmet. If you are out riding, you should wear a helmet. I am 100%. I think it's irresponsible to showcase anything else. I look at people cruising down the highway at 80 miles an hour without a helmet on, and I just shake my head. I think it's absolutely wildly irresponsible. And if you're going to set that example for a kid, I think that's the wrong way to parent. But I'm not a parent, Zach. I'm going to leave that in your court. But I think for me, I like the personal freedom of, if I'm going to go out and I'm going to do as I say, not as, or I'm going to tell the audience, do as I say, not as I do. But if I'm going to, if I'm living, and I haven't done this in years, right? But when I was in college, and a few years after college, I lived in a small town called Topton, Pennsylvania. There was one stoplight, there was one gas station, and my house on Main Street was 2 blocks away from this gas station, right? So if I were to pull my motorcycle out from behind my house and ride it around to the front and park it there while I went in and got my gear, should I be pulled over as I'm wheeling the bike around and have the cops give me a ticket for not wearing a helmet? No, I don't. I think that's crazy.
I think that might be different because it's private property. I think
no, if I'm on the street, because I would leave the garage.
Oh, you'd have to go around the
street. I'd have to go around the block. And so
I see.
That's kind of what I'm talking about. Or I would go from my house 3 blocks down to the gas station, fill up, come back. And I know the opposition is going to say, Spurgeon, you should put a helmet on. What if you were crossing the railroad tracks in Topton and a train came by and you didn't hear it? Right. But the argument there fails because if I'm not wearing my helmet, I can hear the train.
You have super hearing, sure. Yeah. Well, I don't know if you recall this. There was a story in the industry a few years ago of a mechanic at a dealership who was doing a test ride around a parking lot. Basically, it was sort of like, whatever, worked on the bike. And it's very common for mechanics at dealerships to take the bike for a test ride, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's on public streets or whether
it's a requirement in most cases. Especially if you're doing an inspection, you have to take it for a ride. Yep.
So even sometimes it's just around the parking lot of the dealership, right? Like there's a big industrial parking lot. And it's just sort of like make sure it shifts all the way to fifth gear and all the way back down or whatever it is. And he fell over at walking speed or something like that and whacked his head on the ground and didn't make it. And that's an experienced rider in a sort of closed environment and really not a lot of variables. So it's easy to say in retrospect, oh, well, you should have just put a helmet on. And I'm sure that there are a lot of motorcycle dealerships or shops, that require the mechanics to put on a helmet when they do a test drive for
that purpose.
That reason exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, whatever. But it's 9 times out of 10, that person's totally fine. And it's not a big deal. They're just taking a spin around the parking lot. And so I don't know. I think this is interesting, and I think it's a motorcycle. It's a controversial topic in the world of motorcycling because it is subjective to how you feel about infringement of liberty and that kind of thing, but also just so situation specific. It's impossible to nail down a situation where it's like, well, that's the time that you really should wear a helmet, and that's a time where you really don't need to wear a helmet.
I agree, and I think that's where if that rider made that personal choice, then they're going to deal with the consequences. And unfortunately, in this case, the consequences were ultimately death. The same being said, like a motorcycle helmet doesn't guarantee that you're going to survive every situation. And that gets back to some people that make and to be clear, I think this is an absurd argument where they're like, oh, I would rather just die than be a paraplegic. And I don't want to go too far down this morbid road, but the chances of you walking away from an accident or walking away from an accident relatively unscathed because you're wearing the proper motorcycle gear, helmet, jacket, gloves, boots, I will take that's how I want to ride, right? Like I will take the chance of that.
And I think that there's we had somewhere in the research for this, I think it was International Institute for Highway Safety, maybe. There's a statistic about no, I can't find it. But there are statistics, I believe, that suggest that there are higher chance of a traumatic brain injury not wearing a helmet, which makes sense. Makes
100% sense. There's a reason that these helmets exist. And it's interesting because I know we were talking about this in the planning for this episode. We want to do an episode where we talk a little bit more about gear and possibly we'll bring on Pat McHugh, who's our resident gear expert, to discuss some of this stuff. But when you're looking into the arguments of people talking about helmets from even 10 years ago, it doesn't hold up because helmets have come so far, and especially when we're looking in the world of dirt bikes, because I think we're thinking about this from a street bike lens, but when you look at this through the world of dirt helmets, rotational protection and 3 different layers of different types of EPS to protect against low speed and high speed and mid speed impacts, and all of the sophisticated millions of dollars of research that goes into creating these helmets in current 2023, it's unreal. So
yeah,
do I think that there should necessarily be laws? The freedom-loving American in me says, I can understand why you don't want a law. Should you put a helmet on? Yeah, I think you should. Right. So I would side with you on that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting. I like your point of view on this, which is sort of like helmets are good, obviously. And should you always wear a helmet? Probably. Probably you always wear a helmet. But if I ride
my
in the streets,
answer could not be more clear. I'm gonna end it right there.
Well, I've also whether it's across a racing paddock or around the office building to load a bike or something like that, I've definitely technically ridden bikes without a helmet. So I'm very pro helmet, but I can't say that my record is immaculate either. Which again is why I think this is so interesting. And I think again, I hope that this brief discussion of helmet laws has spurred some thought and provoked some interest in your own brain about why you're pro, why you're against, and what the other side of the table might be thinking.
Yeah. I think it's just that. Yeah. It's just, it's, I don't even think, even amongst Zach and myself, there's probably not a clear cut line that we agree on.
I wanted to end on a bit from maybe I don't know if it's like a copyright infringement or what, but there's a Jerry Seinfeld bit about helmets that I really like, where his take on it is basically helmets are a sort of like a sign of idiocy in human nature. You know, this sort of like, we started participating in these activities and we were cracking our heads, and instead of thinking, well, we probably shouldn't do that anymore, we were like, what if we just put something on our head that keeps our heads from being cracked while we do that thing that we like, which I think is really funny. And then he actually mentions helmet laws, and he said his and granted, this is for a comedy routine, not for the sake of argument necessarily, but his whole thing was the only thing stupider than a helmet is a helmet law, which protects a brain that is functioning so poorly it's not even stopping the cracking of the head that it's in. So why would you protect that particular organ if it's not smart enough to put a helmet on? Then, like, I know what Darwin would say. Anyway.
No, it's funny because I actually had a conversation with Chase today. I sent him a Seinfeld clip, and he was like, I can't believe, because I, for the longest time, Highside, Lowside audience, didn't watch Seinfeld. I was always like, I liked Friends. I didn't think Seinfeld was that great. And during the pandemic, Nicole and I went back and we watched all seasons of Seinfeld. And I'm like, I sent Chase a message the other day. I was like, no, I get it now. I'm converted. I find it funny.
So next on the topic of controversies in motorcycling, perhaps less so in your mind, but still interesting, I think, and in the same vein, follows some of the same narratives, I think. Speakers on motorcycles, sound systems that produce either music or just noise, depending on your taste, from a motorcycle, right? If you've hung around motorcycles or been around motorcycle culture long enough, or even if you've been at a cafe on a Sunday morning in a neighborhood somewhere, you've probably heard someone go by on a motorcycle that has speakers on it and they're listening to music, listening to the radio, whatever they're listening to. The arguments for speakers on motorcycles, Spurgeon Dunbar, I would say, again, my choice, right? It's my bike. I should be able to have it make any noise that I want to. Another argument might be cars play loud music. There are plenty of Honda Civics rolling around with their windows down and loud music coming out of whatever type. Also, having speakers on the motorcycle rather than speakers in your helmet, for example, would make it potentially easier to hear environmental sounds as well. You don't have something next to your head, next to your face. This is also could potentially go in conjunction with the whole helmet thing. If you don't want to wear a helmet, but you do want to listen to music, we only have a couple options, one of which is to have speakers on your motorcycles. Did I miss anything?
I think, you hit number one, which actually ties into the same with helmets, right? Which is like America/freedom. Like it's my motorcycle.
Yeah, sure.
I should be able to do what I want. The only other thing is, like, I have heard the argument that, same thing with loud pipes save lives. Like if I have my speakers blasting, like it's going to be harder for you to miss me when I'm out there.
Sure. Yep. Understood. All right. Arguments against speakers on motorcycles.
So I think
Spurgeon.
when we're talking about arguments against, it's a nuisance. It's a public nuisance. It makes motorcyclists look bad, and it kind of paints a negative, picture for all of us when there's a lovely little family sitting in a park enjoying lunch on a Saturday afternoon, and
right.
Bob Johnson rolls up on his V-twin or whatnot of choice, blasting out Metallica. It's something that then all of a sudden people look at all motorcyclists in the same light. I think the other aspect is if you're listening to it so loudly that you are distracted or you're not able to hear the traffic around you, or that the other piece too is and this kind of doesn't hold any water if you factor in comm systems. But like if you're fiddling around with the controls on the bike, trying to change a station or flip to another song or something like that.
Okay, you might be distracted.
You might be distracted, yeah. Because I know with comm systems, the pro for the comm systems aspect of that would be the fact that with comm systems, they mostly are voice control now. So you don't have to play around with a radio the way you would on your motorcycle. You'd simply say, Cardo, play next song or whatnot.
Right. Okay.
Did I miss any cons?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the headset conversation is one I think we should dive into. On my list of things against speakers on motorcycles was arguably just worse than using a headset to do the same thing. If you want to have loud music in your ears, you could just put the speakers next to your ears and do that. I think that's a sort of a basic argument against.
Yeah.
How do you, Spurgeon Dunbar, feel personally about this topic?
So I'm genuinely torn, because I will say that like we had a Street Glide special here for a while, and like there is nothing like cruising down South Street in Philly with Taylor Swift cranked up to 30 and letting the world know where you stand. I'm not
folklore
joking.
Guy?
I'm not joking. I think that like it was so funny to me to be like the juxtaposed character of like you're rolling down this blacked out Street Glide, and like, you know, you're dressed up in the leather and the jeans, and you're just blasting "Girls Just Want to Have Fun" by Cyndi Lauper, and like I don't know. There's something that I like. I like that aspect of like poking fun at ourselves a little bit.
Sure. So like a pro for having speakers on motorcycles for you would be breaking down stereotypes.
Yeah.
Throwing people social curveballs.
Exactly.
I like that. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Continue.
I think that's where I enjoy it. I think overall, though, I grimace, when you hear a motorcycle or a Can-Am, or we have a big Can-Am like Spider 3-wheeler presence in Philadelphia, and for whatever reason, they decided that there's like 37 speakers that you can stick on those things. And it just becomes a public nuisance. And I feel the same way about cars. I think that there should be some kind of a limit on like how loud you can make your car, motorcycle, 3-wheeler stereo system. That's my personal thoughts. What about you?
Okay. Yeah, I don't like them. I don't like speakers on motorcycles. I think it's dumb. I think it's
dumb.
Very clear. What's that?
Dumb.
Yeah. I can appreciate what you're saying about, sort of like feeling the vibe of rolling down a street on whatever bike and having music come out of it. And I understand the personal appeal. However, I don't know. It feels like a very affected thing to do in my mind. Every time I'm in the presence of a motorcyclist or tricyclist that you pointed out, who's blasting music out of the vehicle, it seems very much more for the people around them than it is for them. And I am a big proponent of headsets, and whether it's talking to your riding buddies or listening to music or something like that. And I am just struck by how much better the experience is, because you can have a brand new $30,000 American V-twin with a Harman Kardon system on it, and a brand new bike with factory speakers that's really, high quality system. And as soon as you're going 60 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour, you can't hear anything. It's over. So it's very much clear. It's clear to me that it's designed for low speed, which means it's designed to be when you're going slow, which is around other people. And that's what bothers me about it, is that I think it's more peacocking than it is enjoying the music that you're listening to. Because if you wanted to enjoy the music that you're listening to, whether it's Cyndi Lauper or Taylor Swift or AC/DC or whatever, you'd put headset on, right? You put a headset in your helmet, and then you'd listen to the music.
Those are three of some of my favorite acts. I think AC/DC and Taylor Swift oftentimes don't get paired together enough. So I agree with what you're saying. So sub bullet here is, how do you feel about Taylor Swift, and have you listened to the new record yet?
I just returned from a 2-week filming trip. I have not. No, I have not.
Something that I know about Zach's wife is that she and I share an enthusiasm for Taylor Swift. I figured you would have come home from your trip and she would have just had Taylor blasting nonstop.
No, she has not listened to the full album yet, because she likes to sort of soak it in. She said she's like 5 or 6 tracks deep, I think, but she doesn't like to just like blast through it, because she's like, only every so often you get a brand new T Swift album. So she wants to really like soak it in, like let the lyrics hit her, like listen to a song a few times before she moves on to the next one. She likes to really kind of like bask in it before she appreciates the album as a whole.
That's a great.
For
I love
those of you wondering how my wife listens to new Taylor Swift albums.
Let's say Kat was out on a street glide. Do you think that she would prefer to blast Taylor Swift out through speakers, or do you think she would like a private experience listening through a helmet?
Well, she's in general fairly self-aware person, I think. So I don't think she would want. She's not really a loud music type. I think she would prefer the headset. But I appreciate where you're going with this. Are you reaching for the concept of like people wanting to share their music? Listen to what I have found.
Yeah,
and,
I think
appreciate how this.
Yeah, I think it gets back to some of it is peacocking. Right? Like some of it is like there's something cool about like rolling down the windows in your car and turning the radio up or cranking the speakers and coming to a stoplight and like just kind of grooving along. Like so I'm not disagreeing. I think it is absolutely peacocking, but isn't there some kind of fun in that if it's done at a reasonable like I don't think blasting music with profanity and obscene lyrics and just trying to be a negative influence is something, but like Taylor Swift is wholesome. You can share her message with the world and like at a reasonable level, like there's something fun about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's an interesting back and forth, and I don't know that there is a right or a wrong answer, and I can to a certain extent appreciate people saying like, well, what if I want to cruise along a backcountry road at 40 miles an hour on my whatever motorcycle it is, on my BMW or my Harley Davidson or whatever, and crank the music that I love, and I'm away from people. I'm like out. I'm not near anybody. I'm just cruising along my favorite back road, nice and mellow, and I'm cranking music, and I don't want to have like speakers next to my ears. I want to enjoy the environment, and I want to just like hear. I want to wear my half helmet or whatever, and just like be there and listen to the music. I'm not affecting it. I'm not causing any trouble to anybody. I'm not near anybody. I think that person has an argument.
What I will say is that and we can round out the topic here. In regards to like the right or wrong, I think that most people don't realize how good the listening experience has become in some of these modern comm systems with the Harman Kardon speakers or the JBL speakers. And one of the things that I often talk to people about is that to get the best listening experience that I've found with the comm system is that you wear earplugs and you use a comm system. The earplugs do a really good job of kind of drowning out the erroneous road noise, but yet the speakers are sitting right on your ears, so you get a really like a slightly muffled, but like a really clear, audio experience. And frankly, if you're looking for the best way to actually appreciate music at 70 miles an hour down the highway, it's put a pair of earplugs in, get a high-end speaker system through either Sena or Cardo, and that's how you're going to get it. And
that's coming from an audiophile, everybody. The Spurgeon Dunbar.
That's if I can figure out how to strap a record player to the back of my motorcycle, folks, I'd do it. You
need some really supple suspension. Okay, well, I'm having fun with this conversation, but it is time, I believe, Spurgeon Dunbar, to take a quick break for an ad from our sponsor, Motul.
And we are back with our next controversial topic. If you're doing the math, people, this is controversial topic number 3 of the podcast, and it's tiered licensing. Now, for those of you that might not be familiar, this is a concept that's more popular in Europe. We don't have this, to my knowledge, in any of the states in America. But tiered licensing, so you understand what it is a system where if you are under a certain age and you are just starting off, you are limited into the amount of power your motorcycle can produce. And in some cases in Europe, it's the same bikes that we have in America, but they're actually able to be detuned and restricted below a certain horsepower number, 40, 45 horsepower-ish, somewhere around there. And then when you bump up into your open class license system, that's when you get the full potency of the motorcycle after a certain age or a certain amount of years. I think when we talked to Nora Lee, she was talking about it being roughly around 20 years. Is that correct? 20 years of age?
And in some cases, we should point out it's a displacement limit. Like I think in Italy, when you're 14, you can ride a 50cc. and when you're 16 you can ride a 125, and when you're 18 you can ride whatever you want, or something like that. The actual specifics of each country are not important here. Please don't send us emails saying we're getting this stuff wrong. The point is, tiered licenses as a concept, as Spurgeon said, is that you start smaller or slower, and then you build up toward having a quote unquote full license where you can have any bike you want based on either your age or your experience.
So a 16-year-old can't go out and buy a Hayabusa with 195 horsepower and open it up like they can in America.
Right.
Woo! Yeah.
Okay.
So getting into the pros. I'm going to take pros on this one, Mr. Quartz. So the pros of tiered licensing is you can save lives, right? Like it's safer. You're not putting a 16-year-old on a 195 horsepower motorcycle and turning them loose with all that testosterone and horsepower, or estrogen and horsepower. I don't know. We're not being sexist here.
We're also not editorializing. These are just pros. Just the pros.
Sorry. The other. Thank you for keeping me in line. Another pro that we would have with tiered licensing is simply put, you can become a better rider. You are going to learn how to handle a 50cc motorcycle a little bit better. You're going to learn how to use that horsepower, and then you move up. So really, it's safety, and long term, you're going to become a better rider because you're not intimidated by all this power right up front. Those are really, in my opinion, the two main pros for tiered licensing. Anything else that I missed?
No, I think the argument for creating whatever more lifelong riders because people are eased into it is a good one. The only thing I would mention is I think another pro would be potentially you can start younger than you can in the United States, for example. Like I said, I believe in Italy when you're 14 you can ride a 50cc scooter or a 50cc machine of some kind. And I'm not certain that that's right, but the point is there's potential in a tiered license system for people to be able to start younger, which for people who are enthusiasts when they're children is exciting.
I love it.
That's all.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So move us on to what are some of the cons of tiered licensing?
The arguments against tiered licensing, of course, would be infringement upon freedom, right? Live free or die, man. Like I'm old enough to drive a car. I should be old enough to get whatever motorcycle I want, so don't stand in my way.
I'm sensing a theme here that's very America freedom centric.
Sure. Well, this is it's apropos. We are Americans, so we should talk about it. I think another argument against would be that it's bureaucracy that it's hoops to jump through. So an argument against tiered licensing would be it's going to scare people away from motorcycling because there'll be fewer riders because people will think well, I don't want to have to do all that mumbo jumbo and whatever, take another test if there's another test, or I don't want to have to be the guy riding on the small dopey motorcycle with all my friends. So I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to have a motorcycle. Another argument against would be it's another law to enforce, which is just a pain in the tail from. I think it's potentially bad for optics of motorcycling. It's just sort of like another law to enforce, which makes motorcycles another drain on society in a certain facet, right? The law enforcement has to worry about that, and it's just sort of like it's another barrier of entry, like I said. So those are the arguments against. What did I miss?
The only thing that you missed, and it relates into everything you said, would be overall cost. I think that the tiered licensing, one of the main cons here is that, you're telling me I have to go buy a 50cc scooter, then I got to sell that, and I got to go buy a next motorcycle, and that motorcycle, then I have to go buy another motorcycle. What if I just want to go buy one motorcycle and keep that for the next 5 years? So I think one of the cons is around costs associated with this, or to have to turn your A2 bike into an A1 bike, or however that flips around.
Right.
So
you got to take it to the dealer and have them unlock it or whatever.
Exactly.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that's a good breakdown of pro and con, or for and against. Spurgeon Dunbar, what is your personal opinion of tiered licenses? Because I'm learning some things about you, and I know that you like your liberty.
You know what? You would think that. Based on everything we've set up until this point, you'd think that I am just nothing but a red-blooded, freedom-loving American. I think tiered licensing is something that we should have instilled in America tomorrow. Okay. 100%, I am in favor of tiered licensing. I think starting off on a motorcycle that is 50 horsepower or less, and I understand that maybe we missed this.
Okay.
Around like America in general is like, oh, we're bigger than Europe, right? We got to cruise the highway, and I need more power to be able to cruise the highway. I learned how to ride on that beloved little old Triumph Bonneville that I always talk about, and that thing makes, on a good day, 50 horsepower. And there is not a highway in America that I couldn't cruise. I'm so tired of hearing people say, what if I don't have enough power? A Ninja 400 has plenty of power to cruise down the highway.
We go 100 miles an hour. Yeah,
100 miles an hour.
So to be clear, you think that tiered licensing is a good idea. You are pro, and it's because you think, is this right, that people would last longer in motorcycling? Like it would be a better way to ease people into the pastime, the sport, etc.
I think people would last longer. I think people would be less intimidated.
Okay.
I think that it's a better way to learn how to ride a motorcycle. If you can use all 40 horsepower out of a Z400, like you're going to become a better rider than getting an R6 and trying to wrangle this thing and being intimidated by it and not feeling confident. So I think it's a confidence booster. I think if we can give people a more enjoyable experience, they're more likely to stay with it. I think they're less likely to be injured. I think it just benefits everybody. And also, when you're young, you're stupid. If you're 16 or 17 years old, you have no business being on a full horsepower motorcycle. I just don't think that's the case. What about you?
Well, yeah, I think about the trouble I got into a 150 horsepower car when I was 16, and I think if I had a 150 horsepower motorcycle, it could have been a lot worse. So I'm pro. I also think one facet of this that I find interesting is I think there might actually be a hidden benefit in a removal or just sort of a not leaving room for machismo and ego if you were 16 years old or whatever, when you first got your license, you had to have a bike that had less than 50 horsepower, less than 45 horsepower, something like that, because it would just be what you had to do, right? Mm-hmm. There would be a generation of people who would be pissed off about it, undoubtedly, and perhaps more. But eventually, I think society would settle into realizing that that's just how it is. And when you buy a bike, you wouldn't tease the new rider. Not that I would ever be inclined to do so, but I think some groups of people would be inclined to tease their new friend who just got into bikes and they got a CBR 500. And well, it's not really a CBR, and it's kind of slow, and it's kind of dopey, and it's kind of little. And maybe when you're a real rider, you'll have a real bike like a Gixxer 750 or an R1 or whatever. But I think that would be diminished greatly if it was just the law, and that's what you had to do. Like you had to have that bike, so everyone would just be like, "Cool, man, you're a rider."
To be clear, you're not suggesting that that's you. Like you're not putting down people on CB500. It's more about like
absolutely
you see that in society.
No one should ever make fun of anyone for riding any type of motorcycle because it's cool that we're all riding motorcycles. To be clear, however, I do think that there is an inclination or a subset of riders who would make fun of someone because they're on the little bike and
dude, you see it even with adults, right? There's a riding group here in Philadelphia that I've ridden with a couple times, and every now and then you get like the one person that's gonna like strut their feathers and like peacock and like, oh, look how fast I am, and like, let's see if you can catch up with me. And it's like that doesn't do any good for the people that are just hanging on. And I tend to even whether I'm on a dual sport or an adventure ride or even a street ride, I tend to hang out the back of the pack. Because I think it's important to let people know that like, hey, it's okay to go slow. Like let's do this together and like helping people through it. Now,
sure.
I think tiered licensing is going to fix all of this? No, but I think if we can have a system where when you're just starting off, regardless of age, for the first year that you're on a motorcycle, you have to ride something with 50 horsepower or less. So the first 2 years you're on a motorcycle, 50 horsepower or less. I think it would go. I think people would really appreciate what 50 horsepower means on a 400-pound vehicle. Because you made the comment about your car, and I remember, when I was starting out, I had like an old Dodge minivan, and when I was in college, I bought this beat-up Nissan Maxima, and then like a 1996 Nissan Maxima made like 160 horsepower.
Sure.
Dude, it's like a race car. For like a 19-year-old kid, 160 horsepower in a car is like, holy hell. So like, I think people have this misconception over like what 50 horsepower means on a motorcycle.
I think that's fair. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so. I guess I want to hold your feet to the fire a little bit, because what about that whole cost thing that you talked about? You know, like, what, don't you think there would be some people who would be deterred by a tiered license system because like, well, I don't have to like buy one bike and then get another bike or get unlocked or do this other thing. And I also don't want people to make fun of me, and I don't want, it's just like, it's a pain in the tail. I don't want to do it. So what would you say to those people? Or
listen, first of all, if you're talking about like the cost to unlock, in most of these cases, it's a firmware update at this point, right? Like, so you roll it into your registration cost for motorcycles. In Pennsylvania, the registration of your motorcycle actually pays for the MSF course, right? So the MSF course in Pennsylvania is free. So you can go learn how to ride a motorcycle for free in PA because they are rolling the registration fees into that. There's a way that you can do the same thing for, you know, your state inspections or whatnot, where the dealership, if they're selling you the motorcycle, you go back to that dealership and they unlock it for free, right? Like, this is plugging a computer in. It's 10 minutes of somebody's time, and they're opening it up.
Okay.
And frankly, I've said this before, I bought that Triumph Bonneville, and that was the bike that I had for like 6 years before I ever bought a second bike. And I don't think people realize how much they have to learn on a 40 or 50 horsepower motorcycle. You could buy a Z400 tomorrow as a beginner, and it's going to be at least 2 or 3 years, if not more, before you outgrow that bike. So like, the whole cost thing, I think is kind of malarkey for what it's worth.
All right.
And you can also turn around and sell that bike. Like, if you're buying something used, you can turn around and trade it in or sell it and then upgrade. Yes. Is it a little bit of an inconvenience? Sure. Do I think it's an inconvenience that should stand in the way of us moving to this system, which could potentially open up motorcycling to a much more approachable matter of getting into it? No, I don't. What about you?
Okay.
Do you have some like hard feelings, pro or con, in where you're standing on this one?
Well, I do have a couple other questions I want to ask you, but I want to hold until the end because we talked about a way to round out this show, and I'd like to circle back to all of the topics in a broader sense at the end. So I don't want to jump ahead. But in general, I think I agree with you, and I think that whether we like it or not, motorcycles are a kind of a leisure vehicle, right? They are. It's less likely in the United States, I think, than in Europe, for example, for a motorcycle to be a primary vehicle. It's often a supplementary vehicle or to put it casually, a toy, right? And I think that weighing the value of the fun that you can have, the community that you can build, all the positives of motorcycling against what it costs to get into it, whether that's the cost of the bike or the cost of the license or the cost of the gear, is something that we all kind of have to grapple with already. So, I think it just kind of, I don't know. I think we're already having that discussion with ourselves. It would just be, and to lever that against the idea of tiered licensing would be a little bit short-sighted or kind of foolish. So yeah, I'm on your side. I agree. Again, I don't want to jump ahead, but I do want to talk about how we might implement it.
It's interesting because I think it's one, and we can move on to the next topic because it sounds like you're going to bring this one back around. But this is one that I think every time we've brought it up in the past, and even with some Common Tread articles that we've written over on RevZilla, people get so divided on this one, and I just don't understand why. I don't understand how many people out there really truly believe that you need some big horsepower machine to start off with. And I've talked to people that are like, oh, well, I'm a big rider. I need like we had one of these comments come in about the Hayabusa, right? Like, oh, I'm a big rider. I need that motorcycle to be able to ride.
Right.
Otherwise, it just won't support me. And it's like, I don't know. I just don't agree with that.
Let's pick that apart a little bit. You suppose you weigh 280 pounds, you're 6'6", whatever. And you like the only bike you're allowed to have is a sub 45 horsepower bike.
Get a street twin.
And then
get a Triumph Street Twin.
It's still kind of small though. It's still kind of a narrow seat.
Like I don't think it is. Like
you don't buy it.
I'm
okay.
6'3". I'm 250.
And you're 300 pounds. So. Yeah. Joke, but not to be glib about it. Joking aside, you think that bike's big enough for the
For the podcast audience that's listening, I flipped Zach off with the third finger on
with
my
your
right
eyes.
hand. Yeah. I think that bike is completely big enough. Like that bike, you put a 300-pound rider on that. It's a big 6'6". Like it's a big enough motorcycle. Actually, I was talking to a friend.
I think it's a great bike. I'm very pro. And when you say Street Twin, I think you mean Speed Twin 900. As
You're
of
right.
2023.
They've changed the names.
Yeah,
Good call.
Okay.
But I was talking to a friend, Ian. And Ian is a friend who I met through Instagram, and we've since cemented that friendship in real life. And Ian is a new rider. He is a little bit taller than I am. I would say Ian is probably 6'4"-ish, 6'5"-ish maybe. He's got an inch or two on me. I would say he's probably a few pounds heavier than me. Maybe Ian's like 230, 240, give or take. I'm not trying to project any images.
No.
But he's someone who he got into riding, and he would watch my videos because he was like, I wanted to see what bikes were good for a new rider that was bigger, and I would watch your videos because of that. He ended up buying a Royal Enfield, a 650, which makes about 45-ish, 50 horsepower, somewhere around there, give or take, and he loves it. And he's like, this is great. And he's riding around town. He's taking weekend trips. He's doing all that jazz. And I think, it's just one of those ones where, like, even if you're big and you're adding an extra 300 pounds to a 450-pound motorcycle, 50 horsepower still does a lot for you.
Okay. All right.
Would you not disagree? Or would you disagree?
I not disagree?
Would you disagree? Sorry, that was crazy talk on my part.
No, I appreciate what you're saying. I think I like how positive you're being about that. I think that it is. I know I can see that point of view. I appreciate when people say, like, I'm a larger rider and I don't want to look like a lollipop going down the road on a little tiny bike. I get that. They want a large bike that fits them. So I think that there's something there. But I also agree with you that, I mean, I rode a new Speed Twin 900, and it's a small, but in seat height, same as a Grom. It's very approachable, and yet it has presence. It's like it's got a thunder to the exhaust, and it has a lovely, expensive feel to it, even though it's not. And I think it's a great bike. So I'm kind of caught in the middle there. I think that there's something to be said for both sides, but I agree with you in general. And I love how hard you're leaning into the whole fact that people don't need more than 40 or 50 horsepower. I think that's an interesting hill to die on. And I really appreciate that you feel that way, because I don't think you're wrong.
I just think it's one of those ones where it's like, I've taken, the previous generation Street Twin, like, or my Bonneville, for example, like I've done cross country trips on them. I don't feel like I've mentioned that. Sure. I don't feel like I've mentioned that in a recent episode. So like, it's time to bring it back up again. Take a drink, Highside, Lowside audience. But like, you can take trips on them. They're comfortable to ride around town. I've ride them 2 up, like put a passenger on the back. Yeah. So anyway, we can move on from this topic. I just think that like, it's one of those ones where tiered licensing I'm for, and for anybody saying that you need more power to start off with, I will die on that hill. Like, that's a hill I'll die on. Like, you're wrong.
Nice. I like it. Yeah. I'll be right there behind you, Custer.
Woo-wee.
So
take us into the last one, Zach. Topic 4.
The final topic we're going to cover here today, not that there are not more controversial topics in motorcycling, and if you feel we missed a glaring one, feel free to leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or send us an email at highsidelowside@RevZilla.com.
Yeah, maybe there's a part 2. Maybe there's a part 2 to this. If we get enough comments that people feel we missed out.
We've promised a lot of part 2 episodes and just never done it. We should.
Well,
really
we have
circle back
season
on that.
7, season 8, season 9. I'm just trying to build out some longevity for us. Yeah,
season 17.
Job security.
The final controversial topic we're going to talk about today is none other than lane splitting, and the pros and cons of that. So let's just dive into it. The pros of lane splitting. People who are for lane splitting or lane filtering, going between cars at stoplights or at low speeds to advance more quickly through traffic on a 2-wheeled vehicle. People who are for that practice would say, among the things they would say, fewer rear end accidents for motorcycles because we won't get caught in traffic. More efficient for motorcyclists, which sort of like benefits the pastime, right? Like if you can get across the city quicker on a motorcycle, then you would sell more motorcycles, or you would have more people on scooters, motorcycles, single track mobility vehicles, which in part would decrease congestion in urban areas, for example. And what else is a pro for lane splitting? Did I miss anything?
Did you talk about safety? People talking about like not getting rear-ended?
I did. That was the first thing I mentioned.
Okay, sorry, I missed that. You kind of cut out there for a second on my end. What about, I know that people have talked about in the past, if you're riding an air-cooled motorcycle,
Sure.
Overheating in the summertime.
Sure. That's the reason that it's legal in California, as far as I understand it, is that California Highway Patrol motorcycles were air-cooled way back when, and they made a law. They made a sort of bypass of a law that said motorcycles could go between traffic so that they would not overheat, and that is still the reason that it's been sort of grandfathered into modern society. Anyway, arguments against lane splitting, Spurgeon Dunbar.
So the cons are it's dangerous. That's the one that I hear more than anything else, and it always amazes me because I would think that motorcycles would all favor for this, but the one that I hear the most as a con is it's dangerous, and honestly, as far as cons go, the only other thing, I think danger is the big con if you're talking to motorcyclists. What am I missing?
Yeah, I think certainly. I think another one would be optics for motorcycling also. That it makes, especially when done irresponsibly or in a certain manner, it makes motorcyclists look bad to car drivers, to other people in society. And it's sort of like bad for motorcycling optics.
I would just argue that we're talking about like if lane splitting was legal. Yeah, I guess if you're saying that, like, even if it was legal, if they were recklessly doing it, that's bad for optics.
Yeah, well, I think even if people do it politely, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's a good list of pros and cons. I think we should dive into the nuance of it. And the one thing that I would like to start with this time, if you don't mind, is I believe there was an article on Common Tread about a study in France about lane splitting. Does this sound familiar?
There's a lot of articles in Common Tread around lane splitting and the studies. But yes, yeah,
right.
One in France,
where they did a study and it was not safer, or it did not necessarily reduce accidents, which I think is interesting for those of us who are pro. Agreed?
So it is interesting. What I will say is that earlier in this episode, when we were starting off, I was talking about the RPM program for RevZilla. And I was talking about this magazine that you get,
yes.
the Common Tread Journal issue number 2. This is our second print magazine. In this issue, there is an article called Split Decision by one Spurgeon Dunbar. I'm holding this up for those of you watching on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, you can go to RevZilla.com and type in Common Tread Journal in the search bar, and you can get yourself a copy of this. Or if you're an RPM member, you get it for free. But I wrote an article about lane splitting, and the subtitle there is lane sharing, should you or shouldn't you? And it gets into some of this a little bit more in depth about the split between people. So there seems to be as many studies talking about the safety of lane splitting as there are at times the dangers of lane splitting. So we could sit here and argue about, well, this study says this and this study says this. The big takeaway is that, like, there's really not a set conclusion as to whether or not lane splitting is safe. Because if you go back and study, one of the things that I referenced was like the Hurt report from like 74, 73, don't hold me to the exact year.
Famous. Yeah, sure.
Where they talk about like the benefits and like the decrease in accidents for motorcycles that are, using lane splitting. I think that it's hard to say conclusively, and this is what I struggle with in the article, like there's not necessarily a way that you can argue that it's safer. What I will say is that the anecdotal argument that I will make in favor of lane splitting from a safety perspective is that what I've noticed in the state of California, I lived in California from 2006 to 2010. Mm-hmm. And when I was living in California, lane splitting felt more dangerous than it does now. People didn't seem that aware of it. People were had more tendency to cut you off or to run into you. Since 2006, there has been a law put on the books. There's a lot of discussion around lane splitting in the state of California. And they've codified it a bit. And because of that, I think that cars are more aware of it. It feels safer. The last few times that I've been to California, I feel like cars kind of move out of the way for you. Overall,
Often, yes.
I think lane splitting, or at least the issue of arguing lane splitting in a public forum, has made motorcycling safer in the state because cars are now publicly more aware of motorcycles being there. That's kind of where I took the theme of this article, if you will.
Gotcha. So to tease that out a little bit, would you say that lane splitting would inherently become safer for motorcyclists if it were law, because people in cars would understand that it is acceptable for motorcyclists to practice lane splitting or lane filtering, and therefore would ultimately accept it? And if everyone's accepting of it and sort of gets used to it, then there'll be everyone will get along a little bit better. Is that
yes? And I will take it one step further than that, because like the common argument we hear from motorcyclists who don't want this is they don't feel comfortable doing it. They feel that it is dangerous. They don't want a lane split. That being said, the argument that I would make, and again, this is probably a hill that I'd be willing to die on, is that if you are accepting of lane splitting, even if you don't practice it, if you say, you know what, I want to help argue for this. I want lane splitting to be legal in America. And for those of you listening, lane splitting is legal in a lot of, not all, but a lot of European countries and Asian countries. It is not legal in the United States, with the exception of a few states. Arizona and I think Oregon have some states, some iffy laws in the books, but California is pretty much the state in America where it's widely practiced. Mm-hmm. I'm arguing that if lane splitting was legal, it would be safer for motorcyclists in general. Even if you are not lane splitting, there is more of a just awareness of motorcycling because of lane splitting, and that in turn could reduce overall accident rates for motorcycles.
Yeah. Interesting.
Think about it. Where you are in California, right? Like, let's say you hop in the family Prius and you're riding somewhere and you're sitting in traffic and motorcycles are just calmly going by you. You have this natural sense of like, oh, motorcycles are around. In Philadelphia, where we are, if you're just sitting in stop traffic and there's a motorcycle, 12 cars behind you, you don't see them, you don't hear them, you don't know that they're there. You're not having this regular presence of motorcycles around. Whereas if you have that natural just surrounding yourself with motorcycling, I do think it could help to make awareness.
Okay. Create awareness of motorcycling. Yeah. I get you. I hear you loud and clear, man. I think that's a fair argument to make.
I want to circle back to something you said for a second and ask you a question. Do you agree with the pro that if lane splitting were legal, you think more people would ride motorcycles because of that?
Well, deep in my heart, the answer that bubbles up is yes. But I think that's because I want that to be true. I want people to think, oh, wow, there's a benefit to riding motorcycles. And then they would get an electric scooter to commute to work across the city. And then they'd be like, man, this is fun. What if I got a dirt bike? What if I got a track bike? What if I was a motorcyclist for life? Because I think I want people who endeavor to have the kind of fun you can have on motorcycles to actually do it. But objectively, if I try and remove emotion from the situation or from this argument and ask myself, I think there is potential in certain areas for people to use motorcycles if it were legal, right? I think that there would be a very small but perhaps perceptible groundswell of usage of two-wheel vehicles in urban areas when, there's like, whether it's Austin, Texas or Miami, Florida, or wherever else, I don't know, New Orleans, Louisiana, places where there are enough people that there's enough traffic that it can be a pain sometimes. And, you imagine a scenario of a person in an office building being like, oh man, it took me an hour to get to work today. Man, it took me an hour and 10 minutes to get to work today. And someone being like, oh man, like we live in the same neighborhood. It only took me 35 minutes to get to work. I'm just, I rode my little scooter or my little whatever, my new little motorcycle, cost me $4,500, and like I've just been commuting on it. It's been super fun. And I think that you can see people in that situation being like, oh, wow, that would actually save me time. And that's something that I wanted to try anyway. I like to think that would happen. And I think that if there were a big enough movement in certain areas, that it could actually create fewer vehicles or more smaller vehicles on the road, which would decrease congestion.
Yeah. Anecdotally, if I had lane splitting legal in the city of Philadelphia, my commute is 9 miles. And there's times where to go 9 miles, it takes me an hour to get to the office, to get to the studio. And as of right now, that's 9 miles, takes me an hour to get here, whether I'm just fingering a clutch the whole way, sitting in traffic, or if I'm in my truck with, T-Swift blasting and my coffee in hand and like my air conditioning on in the summertime.
Or you're on your Can-Am with all your speakers.
Right, yeah. So the flip side of this, so my question for you, you are someone that lives in Southern California where lane splitting is legal. It's widely accepted. Yep. You commute to the office on your motorcycle more often than you would take your car. If lane splitting wasn't legal, this is the flip side of this coin. If they came out tomorrow and said lane splitting is going away in Southern California, would you still ride a motorcycle to the office as much as you do now? Or would you go back to, I'm going to crank the air conditioning in the summertime, I'm going to put Taylor Swift on the radio, and I'm going to enjoy my commute with a cup of coffee in hand?
Right. Good question. I would still ride motorcycles, certainly, but would I commute less often on a motorcycle if lane splitting were illegal? Yes, is the answer. I would commute less often. I would find myself reaching for my truck keys rather than motorcycle keys more often than I do now. I think that's inevitable.
There you have it. Lane splitting would create more motorcyclists based on this one person study.
There you have it. Lane splitting being illegal would create fewer Daily Rider episodes and therefore the implosion of YouTube. Yeah. We're obviously coming at this from a certain angle, right? We're two-wheeled people, we're motorcycle riders. So, it's easy to
but just because we're motorcycle riders, again, like I'm going back to, we've written a lot of articles about lane splitting on Common Tread. I have been very surprised with the amount of motorcyclists that do not want lane splitting to be legal because they think that it's dangerous. And my argument to them is that just because lane splitting is legal doesn't mean that you have to do it. If you are living in Southern California or Northern California, if you're living in the state of California, you don't want a lane split, you don't have to do it. But the benefit there for those that want to do it, and the benefit there for motorcyclists as a whole from an awareness standpoint, far outweighs the cons, in my opinion. I think that if it's done responsibly, lane splitting can create much more safe whether it's awareness or safety in general. I think it's a better pro for motorcycling than it is a con.
Yeah. Well, I'm right there with you, buddy.
All right.
And I think it's interesting that you have this outlook to tie it back to the first topic before we move on and sort of truncate all this stuff. It's interesting. I think there's a synergy there where you saying sort of just because lane splitting is legal doesn't mean you have to do it. And you sort of feel the same way about helmet laws, right? You're sort of like, I think there should be a helmet law, but that doesn't mean, or sorry, you said, I think you should wear a helmet, but that doesn't mean I think there should be a law. Like, if you don't want to wear a helmet, fine, don't wear a helmet. That's sort of your outlook, right? And on the flip side of it, it's sort of like, I think lane splitting should be legal because if you don't want to do it, then don't. Whatever.
Or I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that, like, whether it's a law or whether it's a removal of a law saying that you shouldn't do it, like, just get rid. You know what? You're right. You're right, because my argument is, by creating a law that allows motorcycling to legally lane split, it creates awareness for drivers. It gets in newspaper headlines, it gets in articles, it gets in TikTok, it gets in social media, and it creates an awareness saying, "Hey, lane splitting is legal," and that's what the churn is for the other 95% of people that are only driving their cars around.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, so what I would like to do now is go back through these topics that we have that we've talked about, and relatively quickly. See if we can do it or not. I think we can. Talk about what we would do as a recap. So to start off, helmet laws. Spurgeon Dunbar, what would your helmet legislation look like? Would there be a helmet law? Would there be no helmet law? Would there be a in-betweener helmet law? What would you do?
In-betweener, probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what would it look like? Like, give us a brief spell out. It would be like below 20 years old, or like
I'm kind
kids
of
have to
kind
wear
of
helmets,
partial,
but adults don't. That kind of thing.
I'm partial to like what Pennsylvania is like. Below 20, you have to have a helmet. After 20, you can choose responsibly, and you should probably choose to wear a helmet. That's kind of where my gut kind of falls, for what it's worth.
Nice.
What about you?
I would be, I grew up in a helmet law state. I live in a helmet law state. I think that sometimes I see people wearing a helmet and I think that's not a good enough helmet. and it almost makes me wish there was a law about how good helmets have to be, which technically there is, but it doesn't actually mean anything. Anyway, I think I'm a little bit surprised at how kind of like maybe stodgy and like pro-government this makes me sound, which doesn't necessarily vibe with my freewheeling attitude in general. But yeah, I think I'd be pro helmet law. I think that's if I was stamping the paper, signing the papers, I think I would say like everyone's got to wear a helmet, just because I think it'd be better for motorcycling overall.
Zach Quartz and Bob Dylan, freewheeling, baby, freewheeling.
Freewheeling attitude. All
right, so then let's move on to speakers on motorcycles. Zach, I'm going to throw this one at you because this was a pick that you had actually thrown into the podcast. Should you or should you not be allowed to have speakers blasting music on motorcycles?
Speakers on motorcycles, banned for life. Banned. Illegal for manufacturers to produce them with speakers on them, illegal to install them, illegal to play music out of them. No speakers on motorcycles. That's my stance. And I'll take it a step further, which might get us some angry emails. But if the reason you want to ride your motorcycle is so that you can blast loud music at some point, not interested. Keep your money. We don't need you in motorcycling. How's that for an exclusive, mean-spirited, jag-off attitude?
That is awesome. I'm very impressed. I'm speechless, and I couldn't be more excited to see the comments roll in on this one. I am going to go a little bit of a hybrid. I'm going to say there should be a decibel, much like we're seeing in some areas on like exhausts, right? Like there's a decibel meter level here. And if you're one of those idiots that's blasting your music over a certain level, the police get to write you a ridiculous fine. And the fine then goes into paying for motorcycle education, tiered licensing, yada, yada, yada. But I think that like if you want to comfortably listen to your AC/DC or your Cyndi Lauper on your motorcycle and just have that at a comfort level that you're okay with on a country afternoon, go for it. If you're going to ride through the city of Philadelphia blasting music so loud that you can hear it 5 city blocks away, like I am going to come for you. I'm going to fine you. I'm going to make sure that you never do it again.
Okay. It's not a bad outlook. I like that.
All right.
So tiered licensing. This is what I wanted to come back to with tiered licensing. Mm-hmm. What would your law be, Spurgeon Dunbar, for tiered licensing, and how would you set that up? So we talked a lot about sort of like 40, 50 horsepower or like, age limits or horsepower limits or whatever. But what would your legislation look like? What would King Spurgeon of America do to write it on the books?
Yeah, so I think that I don't agree with, one of the things we talked about with Nora Lee when she was on the podcast a few seasons ago or a few episodes
ago. That's Itchy Boots for everyone who knows her as Itchy Boots. Not
sorry.
We're on a first name basis with Itchy Boots, no big deal.
So when Itchy Boots was on our podcast, we talked about the fact that there was an age limit. And it was, if you were under 20 years old, you had to have, a tiered license, and if you were over 20, it was free. I don't think that's right. If you're getting into motorcycling at 40, you are a beginner. If you are getting into motorcycling at 16, you are a beginner. So within 2 years of you getting your motorcycle endorsement on your driver's license, you have to ride a motorcycle that is 50 horsepower or less. For the first 2 years that you are riding, 50 horsepower or less. That's cut and dry. There's no gray area. It's like you become a motorcyclist at 57 years old. Guess what? You're going to be riding around in a 50 horsepower bike for the next 2 years, and you're going to love every second of it.
So there would be license age would still be 16 then.
I like the idea of now this opens us up to younger riders. I think that then, I didn't even think about that. I think like 14 to 16, like 100 cc's or less. If you want to blast,
okay,
yeah, like I think like 100 cc's or less.
100 cc's or less. So not even a Grom for a 14-year-old.
126 cc's or less.
Good stuff.
No, I think that's a great point. I think what Honda's doing should be celebrated. What Kawasaki with the Z125 is doing, I think those bikes should be celebrated.
Right.
So from 14 to 16, 126 cc's. Let's say you want to do horsepower, 25 horsepower or less. How much horsepower does a Grom make? I don't know.
8.
28. There you go. Perfect. What about you?
Yeah, this is a good question. So I'm glad that your cut and dry, no gray area got a little bit more complicated at the end, because I would be very tempted to make a more complicated system like what we just talked about. I think it'd be really cool if when you were 14 years old, yeah, you could have a small bike. I think I might do like 150 cc's or less, something like that. So you could have a 149 cc scooter, 146 cc scooter. That's sort of a cutoff for highway vehicles in places.
Some of those 150 cc scooters, man, they scoot though. Like you get up
fast?
Over 70 miles an hour. Like
too fast. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I liked your Grom cutoff. I like the 125.
Right. 125. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I think something like that could work. But then of course you can have potentially have 125 cc two stroke, but not any street legal ones.
All right.
Because 125 cc is like pretty fast.
Yeah. We still have emissions requirements in America.
The point is, I would do something similar. I like that idea. I like the idea of a tiered license. I like the idea of I like your 2-year idea. Sure, why not? And I don't think that it should be, if you're over 20 years old, you're free and clear. You're always a beginner if you start, and that's how it works. And but yeah, you'd be able to start when you were 14, and then when you're 16, you're allowed to have the 50 horsepower for 2 years.
I love it, man. I think that does so much for like getting people into motorcycling, because if I can't have a license for drive a car until I'm 16, like, and the only way I can get around for those first 2 years is to have a little Grom, like, think about motorcycle sales in America. Everybody out there would be clamoring for a motorcycle.
Then we'd be real podcast stars. So the final topic was, if memory serves, the lane splitting. Spurgeon Dunbar, King of America, what's your lane splitting legislation?
I want, this is no secret. If you read my article, you kind of get it. If you listen to me talk and ramble on, 10 minutes ago, you get my message here. Like, lane splitting should be legal. I think that lane splitting, it's a huge benefit for motorcycling that 49 states in America don't get to capitalize on. And I think it would do wonders for getting people onto motorcycles. I think it would do wonders for causing awareness for motorcycles. I want to lane split. I don't currently do it in Philadelphia because it's not legal. And I agree with you that if you're lane splitting in a state where it's not legal, there's a perception issue there. And I do think that it's our responsibility as stewards of motorcyclists to obey the laws as they are written, so that we are not causing negative attention to ourselves. But like, I wish, and that's my my kingdom goal, is that lane splitting throughout the land is the edict.
Would there be any regulation for your lane splitting? If traffic is stopped on the freeway, are you allowed to lane split at 65 miles an hour because that's the speed limit?
This is back to doing what I say and not what I do, Zach. I think that the way that California has it set up is responsible. I think it's like a 15 mile an hour difference. So if traffic is moving at 20 miles an hour, you're allowed to go 30. Stuff like that. I think that's where it is responsible. I don't think that blasting through stop traffic at 65 miles an hour is responsible or smart. And I think that that's where, back to the perception issue, that's where lane splitting gets, a black eye for being dangerous.
Yes. Sure. Yep. Yeah, fair enough.
What about you?
Well, yeah, no, I'm on board. I like the California system. I think that it works well. I often feel a little bit safer in certain situations because lane splitting is allowed, and I do my level best to practice it in a way that is appropriate for the optics of motorcycling. Does not make me look like a bad seed, and but also allows me to sort of get places quicker. So yeah, I'm on board. I'm pro. Book it.
Love it. So
Okay.
if only we had any say over the laws in this country, we'd be well on our way to a lane splitting society.
Right. Well, your favorite time of the podcast has come, Spurgeon Dunbar. I do believe it's time to play Rev Trivia. Is it not? Where
I'm going to get out the mouse here so I can play the clip for our audience. Now, keep in mind, for those of you just joining us, this is America's favorite engine sound listening game. We play an engine sound. Zach and I have not seen or have any awareness to what this motorcycle is. We're all playing this game together. So you at home, scream out at your radio dials or your computer screens as to what you think this engine sound is going to be. What I will say is that these engine sounds come in from listeners just like yourself. You can email us an engine sound if you like. We'll get more into that in the end. Without any further ado, Zach, are you ready to play the game?
Almost ready. I have bad news. I need to throw Chase, our producer Chase, under the bus because I don't have access to the file yet. I just clicked on it and I don't get it. So our
producer Chase is waving his hands frantically out of the corner of my eye. So while he is setting Zach up with the sound, what I will say with a bit of anticipation here is that the engine sound comes from listeners like you who send an email to Highside Lowside at RevZilla.com. You want to make sure the clip is about 30 seconds long. Chase, I can see you giving me the thumbs up. You're good. You can put your hand down now. And it is a nice steady sound, a few good revs, and then a nice steady sound. Zach, are you ready to go? Do you have access to the document?
I am ready to go. Thank you, Mr. Chase, so much for hooking me up. We didn't have our ducks in a row this time.
It's almost like we're doing this live, people. All right. Without any further ado, here is the engine sound for the day.
Okay.
Well, it sounds broken, so I'm going to say it's a Ducati off the top of my head.
Yeah. Yep.
Tell me that doesn't sound like a dry clutch to you.
It sounds like a dry clutch to me. I do think it's a Ducati. Which Ducati is it, though, Spurgeon? Could be Monster 900, original Monster, right? Monster M900.
So for those of you listening, for those of you listening at home, what Zach and I are referring to, if you've never heard an older dry clutch Ducati before, the first time that I ever pulled up on one of these, I was in college and I was on my Bonneville and I was like, "Hey man, I think your motorcycle is broken." And he's like, "It's a Ducati." And I was like, "I don't know what that means." And we actually pulled into a gas station together and he was like, "No, like it has a dry clutch in it. It sounds like this and it's supposed to sound like that." So that's what we're referring to. That clickety clackety sound is a dry clutch Ducati.
Right. Is the clutch rattling around there, and it would sound even more. I kind of wish this person had. I mean, whatever, it's fine. It would have been a dead giveaway. But if they pull in the clutch lever and disengage the clutch plates from each other, you would hear a real jingle jangle. It sounded like a tambourine. It would go.
But I'm sure our sound effects probably gave painted a lovely picture.
It's exactly like that. Okay. It's a Ducati. What Ducati? We got it. We feel confident it's a Ducati, so you got to make a guess. What Ducati is it? And I'll make a guess, and we should make different guesses so that one of us is more likely to be right.
It's a V-twin. It's not a V4. It's a.
Oh, it's definitely a twin.
What do you say?
It's definitely a twin. I don't think they're. Yeah.
I'm just listening. I'm listening one more time. Just here.
Okay. Fair enough.
Smaller displacement. It is a sport bike. It is a. I can't tell if it has a different exhaust on it or not because it's iPhone quality. But I'm going to say it's a 749, a Ducati 749 sport bike. 748,
749. Okay. Well, wait, hang on. 748 or 749? Come on, man.
Oh, I'm sorry. The 1 cc of displacement. We're not talking about styling exercises here. There was a big style difference between 748 and 749. But yeah, 749. I'm going to go 749. That's my off. We haven't gotten any of the hits yet, people. So I'm holding up the piece of paper that says one of 3 hints, and we haven't looked at those yet. Zach, what do you think?
Okay, so I'm gonna make a guess. It sounds like a little bit bigger and lopier to me. It sounds like it might be air cooled. Your 749 is a liquid cooled engine. I'm gonna go with an air cooled dry clutch Ducati. So I think was like the first Multistrada 1000 have a dry clutch, maybe, or maybe I'll just go like the Monster 900.
Was it a 1000 or 1100? Was the first Multistrada 1000? DS 1000?
The 1000, 1100?
DS,
I think it was
DS 1000. Okay. Either way, yeah. So is that what you're going with?
I'm going with. What am I going with? This is so hard.
Hurry! You got 3 seconds or less. 3, 2, 1.
Monster 900, original Monster.
Original Monster 900, and I'm going with the 749. The first hint. Ooh. I'm out of the running. The first hint number 1, is the first 2-valve 1000cc engine. So it's not a 749.
Not a 749. That's a 4-valve engine. First,
and it's liquid
2-valve 1000cc engine. First 2-valve 1000cc engine.
That might be the Multistrada. That might be the Multistrada.
But what is first 2-valve? I think the hint might be a little bit.
Because here's what I'm taking the hint as. It's the first 1000cc engine. It was a 2-valve engine. So think to like the Ducati Monster had the 2-valve version and the 4-valve version. The Multistrada had the 2-valve, and then you got up and like there was like a 3-valve. Like there was. So
they must have known that we would know that it was a Ducati, and then the hint is it's the first 2-valve 1000cc Ducati engine. Is that the hint you think?
Yes, that's what I'm taking this as. It's the first.
Copy.
It's the first 1000 engine with the 2-valve head.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
So that's.
I guess I'm sticking with my Multistrada.
Well, it's not the Monster, so you were wrong.
You're right.
Too,
it's not the Monster. Okay,
that was a 900.
Yeah. You're right. So I'm going back to my Multistrada guess.
Yeah, I don't know enough to know if the Multistrada. I think the Multistrada 1000 came before the Monster 1000.
I think it might have too. And what about the Paul Smart? Is it a Paul Smart Ducati maybe, or a sport classic?
That came later. The classic, the modern classics came in 2005, 2006, and I believe
the Multistrada was like 03 or something.
I believe
02?
So. Listen, we're all playing in the same ballpark here. So Zach and I are very close in like the years. Second hint.
I'm going to hit number 2.
Who's the most famous designer for Ducati? Zach?
Well,
one of the most famous.
Yeah, I don't think he's the most famous, but one of the most famous, Pierre Terblanche. So interestingly, Pierre Terblanche, he designed the 749 that you guessed, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And he was ridiculed for that. That was, people did not like that bike. Sure. I always loved the 749 and the 999s. Fair enough. I will go on record. I think those are good-looking motorcycles. Pierre
Terblanche also designed the first Multistrada, I believe, with the sort of bifurcated fairing that part of it was fork mounted and part of it was frame mounted, and it.
Did he not design? Did he not also design the Monster of that era?
No. Oh, the Monster of that era.
The S2R 1000.
Maybe. But the Monster, I think the credit for the Monster goes to what's his name? I'm forgetting. Big guy.
I don't know.
Oh my God, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. He lives in Pasadena. He lives right here.
We'll come back to
Miguel Galuzzi.
There you go.
Miguel Galuzzi designed the first Monster.
But I guess when I'm thinking of 1000cc, I'm thinking of the S2R 1000 is where my head goes for Monster. Anyway, bike reviewers hated this bike because it was uncomfortable, still is, ha, is the final hint. Bike reviewers hated it because it was super uncomfortable.
Okay. All right, let's reveal already.
All right. Ooh. Okay. So this is not the first one. I can't believe. So this is the 2006 Ducati Sport 1000 Monoposto. And this is, I don't think this is the first 1000cc air-cooled Ducati.
This is why I was struggling with it too. But this is a sport classic, right? This is
what I was talking about. This is the sport classic line introduced in 2005, 2006. Okay. There was a couple different. There was like a sport classic. Right. There was a couple different versions of this.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we did pretty well. We knew it was a Ducati. We knew it was a dry clutch. And then like we guessed that it was you guessed the 749. I guessed the Monster 900, but ultimately we were pretty close. And I went with air cooled. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back. I went with an air cooled, Ducati dry clutch Ducati. So we did okay. We didn't do great. We did okay.
So I want to take a second to thank you, Ignacio from Argentina, currently living in Luxembourg, for sending us the email.
Indeed.
Ignacio goes on to say that there is a Zard Serpent exhaust with decibel killers on the bike. 2006 was the only model with the dry clutch. 2006 model is the only one with the dry clutch, apparently, similar to the Paul Smart edition, but without the Olin suspension.
Right. And
those are the notes that Ignacio wanted us to be aware of for his Ducati.
Right. And I just looked it up, and I think the Multistrada looks. I mean, my cursory Google search said the Multistrada 1000, that dual spark air cooled Multistrada, was 04.
So
was the first year of that. So you were right. It was before this bike.
Yeah.
Anyway,
maybe our hints might have been a bit off, but like our head was in the right place. We were talking about the same engine.
Indeed. And yes, double thank you to you, Ignacio, for sending that in. That was super fun. I love the Rev Trivia game. I hope you guys like it too. Maybe some of you were shouting at your iPhone or at your headset or in your car or whatever that it was the engine it was. And if you got it right, holy crap, gold star from me and Spurge.
So thanks to all the people that have been sending in their engine sounds, but more importantly, thanks to all the people that have been leaving us reviews and sending in listener comments, because that's what we're moving into now, and we can't read reviews and we can't read listener comments if you're not sending them to us. So a special shout out to please leave us a review over on Apple Podcast. It helps with the show, helps create awareness, and make sure you send us a comment. We want to hear what you're thinking. Zach and I like reading through the comments, and the winner today
we do.
For the t-shirt for the Apple Podcast review comes from the title Highside, Lowside, Napper. Zach, why don't you take this one away?
Yes, thank you kindly. Highside, Lowside, Napper says, and I quote, "I love listening to you guys. My husband plays your podcast often, and I honestly have no idea what you are talking about, but it is so pleasant, like a Jane Austen novel. I have the best naps while it's playing." And we just could not avoid giving this person a t-shirt because we feel like this person will be able to drape the t-shirt over their head and face and help to darken the room so that their naps will be better while listening to Highside, Lowside. And what better piece of fabric to use for a napping face mask while listening to Highside, Lowside than a Highside, Lowside t-shirt?
So what I would say is so
if you're still awake, Highside, Lowside Napper, please claim your t-shirt.
If you're the problem with this, right, is that if the Highside, Lowside Napper is sleeping through this, all of you husbands out there, you need to reach to your right, wake up your wives, and ask them if they are the Highside, Lowside Napper. And if so, we would like to send a t-shirt out to both the husband in this case, as well as the wife. So please make sure you shoot us an email to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com. Get us your mailing address as well as your shirt sizes, and we are going to send out some t-shirts so that you can wear them proudly, or you can drape them over your face and drift into a peaceful sleep.
Indeed. We go where we're needed. Next up, Highside, Lowside comments. And this, I'm going to let Spurge take this in large part, but the first one we're going to dive into is a response to Spurgeon's call to action about giving away a t-shirt to the person who could name what common tread was called before it was called common tread. Spurge, I believe you said something like, if someone out there can tell us what it was called, I will send you a t-shirt. And the responses came in good order, and you picked 3, I believe, to talk through and explain to people why they are right and why they are wrong.
The first 2 we're going to go through very quickly, and I want to explain to them why they're wrong. I'm still going to offer to send them a t-shirt because I like the fact that they've been paying attention to the RevZilla family for so long.
Sure.
So first up was Alex sent an email in and said, before Common Tread, the blog was called BlogZilla. So Alex, you are correct in the fact that there was a separate blog from Common Tread called BlogZilla. When Common Tread was originally started, there were two separate pieces. There was some like gear blog that we did, that was BlogZilla, and then there was what ultimately became Common Tread. So Alex, unfortunately, you're not correct, but I like where your head's at, and I like the fact that you clearly have been paying attention to RevZilla for the last decade, so you're going to get a t-shirt. Joe wrote in and said, I reached back into my email archive. Joe, this implies that you're keeping emails that are like 10 years old, and frankly, I have some concerns that we should probably talk about for you offline and your organizational skills, but like either way, Joe went back into his email archive and he remembered that there was a life before Common Tread, and he said, sure enough, I found it. It was called The Inside Line. Ha! Joe, you are correct. There was a marketing email called The Inside Line, which sent out marketing blasts, but that was not the original name of Common Tread.
Common Tread was a part of the Inside Line marketing email. Is that right?
There were times where we used articles from Common Tread for marketing purposes. Yeah.
And drum roll, please. Yeah, we can't really hear it, but yeah.
It says, damn noise cancel. I can't even clap because you can't hear that either. Austin wrote in. Austin, you are the winner. Austin says, before Common Tread, we had The Hub, Stories by TeamZilla. The Hub was the original name for what would ultimately become Common Tread. Austin goes on to say, I'll never forget, the 25th of July, 2014, when The Hub published Lemmy's article listing the 5 best and 5 worst motorcycle songs of all time. My motorcycle journey began while watching my dad work on his 1975 Suzuki T500 Titan while Meatloaf's Bat Outta Hell LP played in the background. And he goes on to say that Lemmy's list was one of the worst motorcycle songs of all time, and it made me question everything that the experts, quote unquote, at RevZilla were telling me about products. However, they slowly won me back over, and he's glad that it did because he would have hated to have missed this podcast. Austin, what I will tell you, and Lemmy and I probably got, if you go back and look at that article and read the comments section, I defended Bat Outta Hell as a great motorcycle song, and the back and forth, if I remember correctly, and you have to forgive me because this was 8 years ago, bud, and I didn't go back and pre-read the comments like I should have before this podcast, but the arguments were like, well, the Bat Outta Hell song is talking about a motorcycle crash. Meatloaf's lying in the blazing heat under the sun, and his chrome bike is laying in a field somewhere, and he's burning up. And I don't care. I think it's a great motorcycle song. I could probably sing it word for word if we really wanted to do that, but I'm not going to subject the audience to it. Austin, you're the winner. Common Tread was originally called The Hub. Joe, Alex, Austin, you're all getting t-shirts, and I appreciate so many of you out there that have clearly been paying attention to what RevZilla has been doing from a content perspective for the last 10 years. And actually, Zach, fun fact, when this episode goes out, November 14th, I think November 14th is going to be a few days after this episode. November 14th marks the 15-year anniversary of RevZilla.com.
Wow. How about that, everybody? A little history lesson for you. You got some Hub history, some Common Tread history. So yeah, Alex, Joe, Austin, please do send your preferred t-shirt size and mailing address to what is it? Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. I'm still new here.
Does anyone else have Bat Outta Hell playing in their heads right now? Anybody else really tempted to start singing? Zach?
I don't.
Huh? No.
Nope.
Okay.
Moving on. Next comment is from Douglas via email, who said in season 6, episode 4, worst purchases, which I believe included our friend Andy Greaser, Spurge mentioned how much he dislikes gremlin bells, right? Is that what they're called? The sort of like talismanic friendship bell thing that are on, that often hang on the front of the frame in front of the engine on often American V twins, shall we say?
Yeah.
Douglas says, I come from a family of Harley riders, so the bells are tradition. I was gifted a bell by my brother when my first bike was delivered. This bell came off my father's bike, who passed away 2 days earlier. I was never able to ride alongside him, so it allows me to feel like he is riding next to me. I hope to pass this bell on to any of my kids that choose the two-wheeled lifestyle. My question is, do you guys have any sentimental pieces of gear or memorabilia that you plan on having forever and or pass on to future generations? There's a good. I like the way he starts us off by saying, like, I get that the friendship or the gremlin bells, or the friendship bells or whatever are what are they called? They're not called friendship bells.
Gremlin bells.
Gremlin bells? That's not the word I'm thinking of. Anyway, yeah, I like that he sort of starts off by saying, like, yeah, I think they're dumb, but also I have one and I love it, which is very sort of self-aware thing for Douglas to say. So Spurgeon Dunbar, do you have a sentimental motorcycle memorabilia that you think you would pass along?
I would like to go back and just say yes. So I am not superstitious. That is where I don't feel like gremlin bells have any value to me. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't think they're going to keep me safe on a motorcycle. That's where just learning how to ride a motorcycle better is what's going to do it for you. I am, however, very sentimental. I have things that were my mother's, my father's, my brother's, whether we're talking about guitars and records and other ancillary items, or we're talking about camera equipment, or we're talking about motorcycles. Like, Nicole gets so mad at me because I hoard many sentimental things. From a motorcycling standpoint, my Bonneville is the core of my sentimental value when it comes to motorcycling. It's the only bike that I won't sell. It's what brought my father and I back together. We were on the outs for a little bit when I was younger, and we came back together around motorcycling. It's what I've spent. It's the core of my relationship with my uncle and my dad in the world of two wheels. It's changed my life. Like, I look at buying that Bonneville, and it's set me on a completely different course, where I'm now sitting here with the one and only Zach Quartz, hosting a podcast. And
what a dream.
Yeah, this is the pinnacle of my life. It's all downhill from here, baby. So yeah, I am 100% with you, Douglas, from a sentimental standpoint. I would not sell that bike, and I would be devastated if I lost it. And my dad has it right now. One of the things that we did these garage videos, and one of the big questions that came up was like, oh, well, did you sell the Bonneville? I did not sell it. My dad is currently riding that bike, so it's something that we really have shared throughout the years. So that's my answer.
Also, Chase just sent me a message. Guardian bell. I think that's the word I was looking for. Guardian bell was the word I was looking for. I feel like I've heard them referenced as such in the past. My answer is similar, I suppose. My dad has a BMW R80 GS, and he's had it ever since I was a little kid. Ever since. And he's ridden it all over the place, all over the United States, down into Central America and back on a couple of occasions. And he has sort of, used it as it was intended to in many ways. And I remember it very fondly from my youth, riding on the back. And it's sort of a bike that has been a part of our family for a while. And I imagine when the time comes, I don't know that I'll be able to get rid of that bike in particular.
Is that the one that was a Daily Rider episode?
It was a Daily Rider episode. Yeah, I was going to mention, if you care to, there is a Daily Rider episode riding my dad's original BMW GS through my hometown in Vermont, which made me plenty emotional. So I hear where you're coming from, Douglas, and I appreciate the question. I think that's a fun one. I like it.
Yeah, and again, Douglas and Alex, Austin, Joe, thank you all for writing in from a comments perspective. Like I said, Zach and I really like going through these and having conversations and debating them. And we would love to hear your comments. So if you have any comments, questions, or concerns that you would like to discuss with Zach and I, shoot us an email to Highside, Lowside at RevZilla.com. We still would love to hear your engine sounds, but frankly, we're getting a ton of engine sounds. So we're booked up for the engine sound guessing game. We would love your comments. We're pulling some from YouTube as well. So if you're leaving comments on YouTube, that's great as well. But with the final little wrap up piece here that we're doing for season 6, Zach, what's your final thought for the audience?
My big takeaway?
Yeah, what's your big takeaway?
I got a little window into my friend Spurgeon's kind of live for your die views. I didn't realize you were such a no helmet law, bro. Just let's everybody hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but I'm not going to tell you whether to wear a helmet. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I think, you should have I didn't realize that you had that outlook. So I got a little window into your, I don't know, live free or die thinking. I think it's good. I appreciate your perspective, and I think we had some fun conversations today, and I like that. What about you? Any big takeaways from this episode for you?
I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. You don't tell me how to live mine, and we'll all just be happy.
Fair enough.
As long as your crazy California beliefs don't start infringing on mine, then all of a sudden we're in some negative territory there.
You like my lane splitting beliefs, don't you?
You know what? You're absolutely right, and that's what my big takeaway is. My big takeaway is that we actually have more in common than divides us, and I think as we were going into this episode, that's really what I wanted to get at. I wanted to get at, we as motorcyclists have a middle ground. Compromise is a real thing. I don't think you need to ban motorcycle helmets or fully, grace them. I don't think you need to ban speakers or, say that they're play them as loud as you want. I think there's a middle ground for all of these topics. I don't think you should be allowed to lane split at 70 miles an hour through traffic that's stopped, stuff like that. So my takeaway here is the middle ground aspect of everything that we've talked about. Find a happy medium and don't be afraid to invite a little bit of compromise into your life and your beliefs.
Sure. Whether it be helmet laws, lane splitting, tiered licenses, Pismo Beach closure, whatever.
No, Pismo Beach closure. Leave the land. So no, you're right. There's compromise there. Don't run over the birds, there. People. Don't run over the snowy plover.
Sure. But
cute,
still
guy.
wrapping the dunes. Sure.
With that being said, I think we've come to the end of another episode.
I think we have to. What a conversation we had here today. Sure hope you all enjoyed what we chewed over. As Spurgeon said, feel free to leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Feel free to send us a question, comment, concern at Highside, Lowside, at RevZilla.com. And until next time, hopefully we got your gears turning on some of those topics. Spurge?
I enjoyed this one. It was a fun one. Sometimes it's just nice hanging out with just, you and I. I know that...
Yeah, I know that stupid guest.
Yeah, I know that guests are fun and we get an extra perspective in here, but, I think you and I definitely had enough opinions with just two people for this conversation. So without any further ado, we're going to let you get back to whatever it is that you're doing outside of listening to Zach and I ramble on. Thank you for joining us, as always, for episode 7 of Season 6. I'm Spurge. Until next time, enjoy the ride.
See you, everybody.